Have you ever felt like you're just drowning in information? Bombarded by conflicting claims, or maybe you just couldn't quite put your finger on why an argument felt, well, off.
That feeling, yeah.
Perhaps you've encountered some line of reasoning that, okay, it sounded persuasive, but it left you with this unsettling sense that something fundamental was just missing.
It happens all the time.
Well, that precise sensation is exactly what Othniel Max Daves helps us understand, maybe navigate, in his, well, really groundbreaking work on logical fallacies. Welcome to The Deep Dive. This is where we take your questions and sources, and we really plunge into the most important nuggets of knowledge, trying to help you discern truth in a world that feels like it's overflowing with information. Today, our mission, our goal, is to unpack the profound insights of Daves, particularly how he illuminates these logical fallacies, not merely as, errors in thinking,
Right, not just simple mistakes.
but as potent instruments of manipulation.
It's truly a fascinating area, and I think a vital one right now, because Daves, he moves beyond simply defining these flaws in reasoning. He really unmasks them, shows us how they function as strategic tools, how they're actively deployed, in modern discourse to shape perception, to influence behavior.
Yeah.
His perspective, it fundamentally shifts our understanding of what might look like innocent mistakes into something far more deliberate, more impactful.
Exactly. He completely reframes them, shifts our view from, oops, I made a reasoning error, to what he actually calls active instruments of manipulation. So our mission today is to equip you, our listener, with a kind of manual for cognitive defense. That's Dave's term, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Cognitive defense.
Helping you discern truth in what often feels like a really fragmented, overwhelming age. We got a formidable stack of Dave's foundational works right here. We've got his Age of Error, Discerning Deception. Absolutely. We're going to peel back the layers on his perspective. So to kick us off, when we talk about logical fallacies through the lens of Othniel Max Daves, what precisely are we diving into? What's the core idea?
Okay. So at its core, as Daves defines it, a logical fallacy is really a fundamental flaw in reasoning. Simple as that almost. It's an error in an argument's construction, or maybe its content, that renders it invalid or deceptive or just plain unsound.
Even if it sounds good.
Right. Even if it sounds incredibly persuasive or maybe intuitively correct. Daves really emphasizes that fallacies frequently simulate coherent reasoning. They mimic it, but they do it without needing any actual truth or evidence or, logical rigor to back them up. They possess the appearance of logic.
The appearance.
But the underlying substance, the stuff that makes an argument actually sound, it's critically missing. It's almost like a trick of the mind designed to bypass your rational scrutiny.
So it's like an illusion of logic then. They kind of look like real solid arguments from the outside maybe. But when you try to grab onto them, they just dissolve. Smoke and mirrors.
Precisely. That's a very, very apt metaphor for what Daves describes. And he meticulously differentiates between two main types of these deceptive illusions. First, you have formal fallacies. Now, the error here lies purely in the structure of the deductive reasoning.
The structure itself.
Exactly. Think of it less like a flawed statement and more like, say, a mathematical equation with a broken formula. The conclusion is invalid regardless of the content of the argument.
Doesn't matter what you're arguing about.
Nope. The problem isn't what you're arguing about, but how you're attempting to prove it. The logic itself is flawed. Daves offers a classic example you might have heard, affirming the consequent. The flawed logic goes something like this. If A, then B. Okay, B is true, therefore A must be true.
Okay.
And to illustrate this, Daves gives a pretty relatable scenario. If it rains, that's A, the streets get wet. That's B. Okay, the streets are wet, B is true, so it must have rained. A must be true.
Yeah, it sounds plausible on the surface.
It does, right. It feels right. But Daves quickly points out the structural flaw. The streets could be wet from a street cleaner, maybe a burst water pipe, someone washing their car. Lots of reasons.
Right. Other causes for B.
Exactly. The structure of that if-then statement, that inference, is inherently fallacious. It's independent of the actual weather conditions. You're concluding a single, unique cause based on an effect that could have multiple causes. These formal fallacies, they're often a bit easier to spot once you understand the basic rules of logic, because they break those fundamental principles of inference.
Okay, so that's formal. What's the other kind?
Then we get into informal fallacies. And Daves argues these are far more insidious. And crucially, this is where most of the deliberate manipulation tends to happen.
Okay. More subtle.
Much more subtle. The error here isn't in the pure logical structure, like the math equation. It's in the content or the context or even the rhetorical form of the argument itself. They are incredibly persuasive, often because they play directly on our emotions or our pre-existing biases or those ingrained mental shortcuts we all use.
So they exploit how our minds naturally work.
Absolutely. They sound convincing, they resonate with us, but they are fundamentally unsound when you actually subject them to logical scrutiny. And Daves explains that these informal fallacies, they just blend seamlessly into everyday conversation, into media narratives, political speeches, even corporate marketing. Makes them exceptionally difficult for the average person to spot and counter without, specific awareness or training.
That's a really crucial distinction. So we're not just talking about accidental slip-ups in thinking here, or simple missteps in a debate. Daves paints a much more deliberate, even strategic picture, doesn't he?
Yes.
He's really pushing us to see them as something active, something intentional, rather than just blunders.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is where Daves' work becomes not just interesting, but frankly, profoundly important, and maybe a bit unsettling. He states pretty unequivocally that the very nature of conflict, of the battlefield in our modern era, has fundamentally shifted. It's changed.
How so?
It's no longer confined to, geographic skirmishes where armies clash on physical terrain. Instead, Daves asserts it has moved into a neurological, informational, and perceptual domain.
Wow, neurological.
Yeah. In this redefined new battle space, logical fallacies are transformed. They're no longer just academic concepts or rhetorical quirks. They become what he chillingly labels weaponized tools.
Weaponized tools.
They're not just errors, they are deliberate instruments of power.
Weaponized tools.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly serious, almost like something out of, I don't know, a spy thriller. But Daves is saying this is happening right now in our daily lives.
He is, very much so.
What exactly is this cognitive and information warfare he's describing? The kind that fallacies are supposedly driving.
Well, he defines these concepts with stark clarity. Cognitive warfare, according to Daves, is the deliberate targeting of fundamental human mental processes.
Like what?
Like your perception of reality, your memory, how you form beliefs, and ultimately how you make decisions. The overarching goal isn't just to influence you. It's to directly manipulate your behavior and, critically, to erode your individual autonomy, your ability to think for yourself.
So it's a battle for the mind.
It is, as Daves often puts it, a battle waged directly for your mind, your very capacity to think and act independently. And complementing this, Daves defines information warfare, IW, as the strategic use of all forms of information.
All forms, not just false stuff.
Nope. Including accurate information, but also misinformation that's unintentionally false and disinformation, which is intentionally false, using all of it to gain influence or secure strategic advantage or maybe destabilize adversaries. So this isn't simply about sharing facts, it's about meticulously shaping the entire informational landscape, bending and twisting reality if needed to suit a specific strategic objective.
Building a narrative.
Exactly, constructing a narrative that serves the manipulator's ends, regardless of whether it's actually true.
And if I'm understanding Daves correctly, he's saying fallacies are the core engine driving all this. They're what make these large-scale operations actually work.
That's precisely Daves' central argument. He calls them the logic engine for these complex operations.
The logic engine.
Yeah. He posits that fallacies provide the operating system, if you will, for perception management, for thought destabilization, and for what he calls compliance engineering.
Compliance engineering, that's telling.
It is. It means they are the invisible code, the underlying framework that allows manipulative forces to control what you perceive, how you process that information, and ultimately how you are inclined to act. The intentional deployment of these fallacies, as Daves meticulously points out in Age of Error, is designed to achieve specific, often harmful outcomes. To confuse target populations, to demoralize them, to divide them along existing fault lines, and ultimately to, quote, reprogram their beliefs and behaviors. The fundamental point Daves makes again and again is that these are not accidental mistakes. They are not rhetorical blunders. They are, he insists, deliberately or unconsciously deployed for strategic or psychological purposes.
Oh.
They are tools wielded to shape perception without the inconvenient burden of truth, allowing persuasive but ultimately false realities to take hold. This bypasses the need for evidence or genuine logic, making them incredibly potent today.
So, if they are these weaponized tools, how exactly do they operate? What are the specific mechanisms, the tricks of the trade that Daves identifies? How do they achieve these manipulative goals? Sounds like there's a whole sophisticated toolbox involved.
Indeed, it's more than just a toolbox. Daves presents it as a meticulously engineered system. He breaks down how fallacies function by exploiting our natural cognitive shortcuts, our deepest emotional triggers, and our inherent social biases. He identifies several core mechanisms, each one designed to subtly, or sometimes overtly, distort reality, diverting us from logical reasoning. The first mechanism Daves really unpacks is diversion. This is a classic tactic, right? Like a magician's misdirection, designed to redirect your attention away from the real issue.
Okay, like changing the subject.
Exactly. The prime example here is the red herring. This fallacy introduces an irrelevant but often emotionally charged or inflammatory topic to distract from the actual argument or maybe a difficult question. Daves provides a stark illustration. Imagine a politician asked about a controversial policy, maybe, and they respond with, "Why are we worrying about this policy when our city has so much crime?"
Ah, deflection.
Pure deflection. By bringing up crime, the speaker tries to shift the entire conversation away from the policy that was actually under scrutiny. Daves notes this is frequently used by state actors, he mentions Russia specifically, to derail investigations when facing critiques about their actions. Just change the subject to something inflammatory. A close cousin to the red herring, also under diversion, is whataboutism. This directly deflects scrutiny by instantly redirecting blame back to the accuser or maybe some other party without ever addressing the original criticism.
We hear this one a lot.
Constantly. Daves highlights how the Soviet Union famously used this when confronted with human rights critiques. They'd retort, "Well, what about your country's human rights record?"
Right, what about?
He also points out China's consistent use of this during, say, pandemic cover-ups, trying to avoid accountability by pointing fingers elsewhere. The Daves principle here is pretty simple. When an argument suddenly shifts focus, or someone responds to a critique by pointing fingers elsewhere, ask yourself, is this actually addressing the core issue, or am I being artfully diverted?
Good question to keep in mind. What's next?
Next, Daves describes the mechanism of simplification. This involves forcing binary choices, either thinking or collapsing really complex issues into overly simplistic options, often to eliminate any room for nuance or alternative views.
Black and white thinking.
Exactly. The key fallacy here is the false dilemma, sometimes called the bifurcation fallacy. This tactic presents only two options, as if they are the only possibilities, when in reality, many more might exist. Daves provides a chilling, real-world example. Support our military actions, or you're a traitor.
Wow, yeah, that leaves no room for discussion.
None. It dramatically shrinks public discourse, eliminates any space for nuanced debate, alternative solutions, or even legitimate patriotic opposition.
Yeah.
It forces people into an either-or choice that is a complete fabrication, a false construction of reality. It's a powerful tool for controlling dissent.
So be wary of those stark either options.
Definitely. Daves argues that whenever you hear an argument presented with only two choices, especially if those choices carry strong moral or emotional weight, it's a huge red flag. You might be dealing with a false dilemma.
Okay. Diversion, simplification.
Well,
What else?
then there's amplification. This mechanism is centered on overstating risk or virtue or threat to create a heightened sense of urgency or alarm or maybe even moral superiority. The slippery slope fallacy is a classic example here, arguing that a seemingly small initial step will inevitably lead to a long, disastrous, unavoidable chain of negative consequences.
Like dominoes falling.
Precisely. The form is typically, if we allow A, then B, C, D, and eventually Z will inevitably follow. Now, sometimes small steps do have consequences, but this fallacy exaggerates the certainty and the severity of that chain reaction, often to just prevent any action from being taken at all.
Got it.
And a truly powerful amplification tool, Daves explains, is the appeal to fear. This is exactly what it sounds like, instilling anxiety, panic, or terror to override critical thought and rational deliberation, pushing for immediate, often irrational action based on fear.
Using fear to short-circuit logic.
Exactly. Daves notes this is a favored tactic of, say, totalitarian regimes. It's used frequently in false flag propaganda to justify aggression, and even in public health crises around biothreat manipulation, all to ensure compliance through terror rather than reasoned consent.
So when you feel that fear response kicking in.
Daves urges you to pause. Assess if you're being logically compelled or emotionally manipulated. Big difference.
Okay. What's the next mechanism?
The mechanism of obfuscation. This involves intentionally using vague or overly technical or ambiguous language to mislead or confuse the audience, basically preventing clear understanding.
Making things muddy.
Precisely. Equivocation is a prime example. This is where a word with multiple meanings is used inconsistently within an argument, subtly shifting its meaning midway to support a desired conclusion. Daves gives that classic riddle-like illustration. A feather is light. What is light cannot be dark, so a feather cannot be dark.
Ah, playing with the word light.
Exactly. Light first means not heavy, then it means emitting illumination, creating a totally deceptive conclusion based on wordplay. Sneaky. Very. And a more direct form of obfuscation, one Daves highlights as increasingly prevalent in corporate and bureaucratic settings, is what he calls the jargon fallacy.
The jargon fallacy.
Yeah. This is the intentional use of overly complex or specialized language designed specifically to confuse rather than clarify. It creates an impression of expertise where maybe little substance actually exists. He cites that memorable corporate example. Our blockchain-enabled ESG AI platform uses synergistic carbon-negative feedback systems.
Chuckles. Sounds impressive, means.
Exactly. Daves notes that such phrases often mean very little in practical terms. They serve primarily to obscure actual practices or maybe a lack of progress. Makes it really difficult for outsiders to scrutinize what they're doing or hold them accountable.
So the advice there is?
Daves' principle for navigating obfuscation is always ask for plain language. If you can't explain it simply, he suggests, you either don't understand it well enough yourself or you might be trying to hide something.
Good rule of thumb. Okay, what else is in the toolbox?
Misdirection is another core mechanism Daves explores. This is where the burden of proof gets subtly shifted, or maybe the goalposts are redefined mid-debate to gain an unfair advantage. Moving the goalposts is a common role. Changing the criteria for success after they've supposedly been met makes it impossible for an opponent to ever truly satisfy the demands.
Like, oh, you did that. Well, now you have to do this.
Exactly. Well, you passed the initial test, but can you pass this more rigorous one now? This tactic just endlessly shifts the target, ensuring no real progress can ever be acknowledged. It's incredibly frustrating.
I can imagine.
Closely related is the burden of proof shift. This demands that the opponent disprove a claim, rather than the claimant providing evidence to support their own assertion. A classic example Daves uses, often cited, is prove God doesn't exist.
Right, putting the burden on the skeptic.
Exactly. The burden is unfairly placed on the disbeliever when the one making the positive claim is logically obligated to provide the evidence. Daves warns that when an argument's proponent refuses to offer evidence for their claim and instead demands you disprove it, they are likely trying to dodge accountability.
Okay, that makes sense. And the last mechanism.
Finally, we delve into the broad mechanism of appeal. This is where arguments basically abandon logic and facts altogether in favor of tapping into emotion or perceived authority or just sheer popularity. The appeal to authority, or argumentum ad verecundium, uses an authority figure as evidence for a claim, but without adequately assessing their actual credibility or their relevance to the specific topic, or even considering if dissenting experts exist.
Like a celebrity endorsement for something they know nothing about?
Exactly. Daves cites the simple but pervasive form. Famous actor X says it's true, so it must be. The logical flaw is obvious. An actor's fame doesn't grant them expertise in, say, climate science or economic policy. It's irrelevant authority. Then there's the appeal to popularity, or the bandwagon fallacy. Claiming something must be true simply because a majority of people believe it. Everyone believes X, so X must be true. Popularity doesn't equate to truth.
Obvious when you point it out.
It seems obvious, but it's incredibly persuasive. And finally, the appeal to emotion. Daves identifies this as one of the most potent and widespread forms of manipulation. This fallacy directly manipulates emotional responses: pity, flattery, guilt, anger, even joy, rather than providing logical reasons to support a claim.
Playing on feelings instead of facts.
Totally. Daves gives a classic interpersonal example. If you truly loved me, you'd agree with me on this.
Oof, yeah.
That statement just bypasses rational thought entirely, right? It directly targets the other person's affection or sense of obligation to extract compliance. And this tactic gets scaled up massively in political campaigns, in advertising, in public narrative, seeking to evoke a visceral reaction that overrides critical evaluation.
So be aware when your emotions are driving the conclusion.
Definitely. Daves urges us to recognize that while emotions are powerful and important, they are not, by themselves, valid evidence for a logical claim.
Wow. That truly sounds like a complete playbook for bypassing rational thought and steering someone exactly where you want them to go, often without them even realizing they're being manipulated. It's deeply insightful.
That's precisely what it is. And Dave stresses these fallacies aren't mere accidental errors. They're not innocent mistakes in reasoning. Instead, they are consistently and effectively deployed for strategic or profound psychological purposes. Whether that's done consciously or unconsciously, their pervasive use points to a much deeper, more intentional motivation beyond just simple error.
So, okay, what does this all mean for someone using them? What's the underlying motivation? Why intentionally choose to distort logic and obscure truth instead of just engaging with it directly? What's the ultimate payoff for the manipulator?
Dave's meticulously outlines several key motivations, and it paints a clear and, often unsettling picture of the strategic intent behind the widespread use of fallacies. A primary motivation, he argues, is simply to win arguments without needing to present the truth. It's that basic.
Winning over being right.
Pretty much. In politics, marketing, legal debates, public discourse fallacies provide powerful rhetorical weapons. They allow individuals or groups to win debates without substantiating claims. Daves describes this as persuasion without substance. It enables a speaker to bypass rational resistance, especially when their actual position lacks genuine evidence or logical coherence. Appear reasonable, appear persuasive, even with a hollow argument, and you achieve rhetorical victory.
Winning without truth. What else?
Another incredibly powerful motivation is to manipulate emotion and identity. Fallacies are exceptionally effective at tapping into those primal human responses.
Yeah.
Fear, tribal loyalty, pride, guilt, even aspirational desires.
Hitting us where we live, emotionally.
Exactly. By activating these emotional triggers, the user can bypass critical faculties. They provoke instinctive, gut-level responses rather than reasoned deliberation. This allows them to shape opinion and direct behavior by appealing directly to how people feel or how they identify, rather than what they think or know. It's a shortcut to compliance.
Makes sense.
Fallacies are also widely used to conceal weakness or deceive. When a position, or maybe an action, lacks evidence or logical coherence or maybe moral justification, fallacies serve as kind of rhetorical masks.
Bring up the flaws.
Right. They hide these fundamental deficiencies behind layers of distraction, distortion, misrepresentation. For example, Daves notes that deploying a strawman fallacy allows someone to, quote, destroy a misrepresentation rather than face the real issue.
Attacking a fake version of the argument.
Exactly. Instead of confronting the actual strong argument against their position, they invent a weaker, distorted, easily defeatable version of it. Then they knock that down and declare victory, completely sidestepping genuine accountability.
Clever in a dishonest way.
Very. And crucially, Daves highlights how fallacies are expertly designed to exploit inherent cognitive biases. We all operate with predictable mental shortcuts, right? Heuristics. Fallacies are crafted to prey upon these natural predispositions.
Can you give some examples of that?
Sure. Consider confirmation bias. That's our natural tendency to seek out, interpret, and recall information that confirms what we already believe.
We all do that to some extent.
We do. And fallacies like hasty generalization, drawing broad conclusions from limited confirming evidence, or cherry-picking, selectively presenting only data that supports your view, they actively reinforce this bias. They help create those intellectual echo chambers where opposing views just can't penetrate. Then there's authority bias, our inclination to substitute credentials for truth. Makes us vulnerable.
Believing someone just because they sound like an expert?
Right. This is leveraged by the appeal to authority fallacy, and also what Daves calls the technocratic fallacy, assuming technical expertise alone guarantees wisdom or correctness. We defer to someone who seems to know, even if their authority is irrelevant or their claims are unsupported, just because they project that air of expertise. The fear response fundamental survival instinct is exploited by fear appeals and the slippery slope fallacy. These bypass reason through panic and alarm, urging us to act impulsively out of dread, not careful thought.
Using panic.
Exactly. And tribalism, which shows up as in-group bias or moral equivalence, plays on our deep-seated loyalty to our social or ideological groups. Fallacies are used to demonize outgroups and suppress dissent. You hear things like people like us know better, or the moral equivalence fallacy, which deflects criticism by saying, sure, we did wrong, but so did they.
Us versus them.
Precisely. It reinforces that us versus them mentality, making it exceptionally difficult to evaluate arguments impartially. Loyalty overrides objectivity. And finally, in an age of information overload, Daves explains how fallacies like the red herring and relentless repetition, what he calls ad nauseum, induce a state of cognitive fatigue.
He's getting worn down by it all.
Right. When you're bombarded by constant, contradictory, or overwhelming information, you often reach a point of mental exhaustion. And that can lead to a passive surrender to whatever narrative is loudest or most dominant.
So the ultimate goal can be narrative control.
Ultimately, yes. Daves reveals that fallacies are deployed to control narratives. Regimes, corporations, powerful ideologues, they use them to construct false but coherent narratives that dominate public perception, shaping collective reality. He points out that repeating claims ad nauseum, literally to the point of nausea, can overwrite truth through sheer volume and persistent exposure. A falsehood, heard often enough, can start to feel true, simply because it saturates the informational environment. It's not just about convincing, it's about engineering reality.
And he sums up this underlying intent as being fundamentally about power and control, isn't it? About avoiding accountability and even waging a kind of psychological warfare. This truly frames it as a battle for the mind, a fight for our perception of reality itself.
That's a powerful and, I think, accurate way to articulate Daves's core message. And importantly, he doesn't just leave these concepts in the realm of abstract theory. Instead, he provides compelling historical and contemporary examples. How governments, corporations, even individuals leverage these fallacies across all sorts of domains. It becomes clear this isn't abstract at all. It's happening all around us, influencing major decisions, shaping public opinion, affecting our daily lives.
Okay, let's get concrete then. Let's start with governments. How do they use these fallacies as instruments of power? What does that look like in practice, according to Daves?
Right. Governments, as Daves details quite extensively in Age of Error, can be master strategists in employing fallacies for statecraft and control. One key area is the manipulation of the masses. They frequently deploy the ad populum or the bandwagon fallacy, asserting something must be true or good simply because the majority supports it.
Everyone's doing it.
Basically, Dave cites examples like, the majority supports this war, or the majority supports this law. Therefore, dissent is anti-patriotic. This tactic is used in war justification or to push through controversial security policies. It effectively frames any opposition as disloyal or outside the mainstream, which really suppresses debate. A harrowing and detailed case study Daves examines is the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. He argues a sophisticated cluster of fallacies was deployed in concert there to shape public opinion. Well, the government utilized a powerful appeal to fear, frightening the public with apocalyptic imagery of mushroom clouds to emphasize the supposed threat of WMDs, despite, significant intelligence uncertainties at the time. They also presented a stark false dilemma. Either we invade Iraq or allow terrorists to destroy us. That framing artfully eliminated any middle ground, any diplomatic alternatives, any non-military solutions from public consideration.
Forcing a choice.
Exactly. And crucially, a pervasive red herring was used by repeatedly conflating Saddam Hussein's regime with al-Qaeda, despite, as Daves points out, no verifiable operational ties between them.
Linking two unrelated threats.
Right. The result, as Daves meticulously argues, was widespread public support galvanized by manufactured fear and these misleading associations, rather than verified intelligence. And this, he notes, led to profound long-term regional destabilization and immense human cost, illustrating the devastating real-world power of weaponized fallacies.
That's a powerful example. What else do governments do?
Beyond direct manipulation, Daves highlights how governments engage in deception via framing and technocracy. He discusses the pervasive use of appeal to authority combined with an appeal to complexity. He cites instances where institutions like, say, the Federal Reserve, when defending complex or maybe opaque monetary policies, argue that only economists can truly understand the intricacies.
The expert.
Essentially. This creates what Daves calls technocratic shielding from public scrutiny. He specifically mentions Ben Bernanke, former Fed chair, whose authority was often appealed to regarding policies like quantitative easing, QE. The implication being that such complex decisions are beyond public understanding and should just be left to the specialists.
Which shuts down debate.
It effectively shuts down public debate and accountability by deeming the public unqualified to even ask questions. Governments also notoriously use fallacies for diversion from accountability. Whataboutism and, to quote, the appeal to hypocrisy fallacy are incredibly common.
Pointing fingers back.
Exactly. Daves references the Soviet Union's consistent response to Western human rights criticism. Well, what about racism in the U.S.? This was, according to Daves, a highly successful rhetorical neutralization tactic, deflecting attention from their own abuses by highlighting perceived flaws elsewhere. Similarly, poisoning the well is another potent tactic, preemptively discrediting a source or an argument before it's even presented.
Like calling someone names beforehand.
Right, declaring, oh, that critic is a known conspiracy theorist, thereby undermining their credibility from the outset, regardless of whether their claims have any validity. Daves also notes that Western psychological operations, or PSYOPS, basically military tactics to influence foreign audiences, have historically used fallacies in wartime. Framing enemy leaders as irrational, maybe using ad hominem attacks or threatening existential consequences, a slippery slope argument, all to shape the battlefield of perception.
That's pretty chilling. See how systematic it is. It's not just off-the-cuff remarks. It's like a deliberate strategy. What about corporations? How do they use fallacies? Maybe in marketing or when they face public scrutiny?
Corporations, as Daves illustrates vividly, are equally adept, equally sophisticated in their use of fallacies, primarily as powerful market and messaging tools. For widespread consumer manipulation, the appeal to nature is just rampant. Our product is natural, so it must be good.
We see that everywhere. Natural sounds good.
It does. It taps into a deep-seated but often unexamined belief that natural inherently equates to healthy or safe or superior, often without any real scientific basis. Daves extensively details the use of fallacies in greenwashing campaigns. He cites BP's infamous Beyond Petroleum campaign as a prime example of corporate deception.
Yes, I remember that one.
That campaign was a masterclass in deploying multiple fallacies to create a really misleading public image. They heavily used the appeal to nature with all those visuals of green fields and solar panels, presenting this environmentally responsible image. They employed a false analogy, essentially saying, we're like a new green company, while simultaneously continuing, even expanding environmentally intensive practices like deep water drilling.
Saying one thing, doing another.
Precisely. And they utilized repetition, ad nauseum, saturating media with their slogans and imagery to create this false association in the public mind between BP and environmental stewardship. This carefully constructed illusion was, of course, tragically shattered by events like the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, revealing the profound gap between their rhetoric and their reality.
A stark example of the disconnect. How else do corporations use them?
In terms of corporate defense and deception, obfuscation, specifically the jargon fallacy, is a really common tool, especially in investor relations, regulatory hearings, even internal communications. It involves intentionally using that overly complex, technical, or vague language to confuse the audience or avoid clarity. Makes it incredibly difficult for outsiders to scrutinize their practices or pinpoint accountability. Daves' earlier example nails it. Our blockchain-enabled ESG AI platform. It sounds impressive, means little, deters inquiry.
Right, the technobabble shield.
Exactly. And for diversion from harm or risk, corporations sometimes rely on truly insidious tactics, like suppressed evidence, relentless ad nauseum repetition, and calculated appeal to authority. Daves dedicates a significant portion of discerning deception to the tobacco industry's decades-long denial of the cancer link. From the 50s through the 90s, this was a prolonged, deliberate campaign of deception.
Denying the science for decades.
For decades. They systematically withheld internal studies that clearly proved cigarettes were carcinogenic. That's suppressed evidence. Simultaneously, they repeatedly, tirelessly denied any link ad nauseum, flooding the media with their counter-narrative of doubt, manufacturing controversy. They even went so far as to pay doctors to publicly endorse smoking, a chilling appeal to authority, proclaiming more doctors smoke Camels than any other brand.
Wow, paying doctors.
This concerted, multi-pronged effort, Daves argues, delayed regulation and public awareness for decades, cost millions of lives, a truly stark testament to the destructive power of weaponized fallacies.
Absolutely devastating. Any more recent corporate examples?
He also points to Facebook's defense during various misinformation scandals. He points out how they employed scapegoating, blaming individual users and sort of bad actors for systemic design flaws and algorithmic amplification built into their own platform. They deployed a classic straw man by misrepresenting their critics as, say, anti-free speech extremists, making their arguments seem unreasonable and easier to dismiss. And they utilized circular reasoning, effectively saying, we're not responsible for this content because our policy says we're not responsible. This allowed them, Daves argues, to avoid significant regulatory consequences and direct culpability for the spread of widespread misinformation and its societal harms.
It's truly fascinating and deeply concerning to see these patterns play out, governments, corporations. And finally, what about us? As individuals, how do we use these fallacies, maybe even unconsciously, in our daily lives, in our relationships, or defending our own beliefs?
Individuals, Daves explains, also employ fallacies extensively, both intentionally and unintentionally, mostly for social and ideological influence, often without even realizing the manipulative patterns they're replicating. In interpersonal manipulation, we frequently see tactics like gaslighting, manipulating someone to question their own memory, their perception, even their sanity, specifically to deflect criticism or avoid responsibility.
Making someone feel crazy.
Exactly. Daves notes this is tragically common in abusive relationship dynamics. Phrases like, "You're just being paranoid, I never said that," designed to make the victim doubt their own reality. Another subtle but powerful tactic is the loaded question. Embedding a damaging presumption into a question, making it impossible to answer directly without seemingly admitting the presumption, like, "Why do you always overreact?"
Yeah, it assumes you do overreact.
Precisely. It forces you to defend against a premise that hasn't even been established. For ideological or identity defense, fallacies like no true Scotsman and the identity fallacy are incredibly potent. Daves uses the Jonestown cult dynamics from the 70s as a stark, frankly horrific example of how these can play out to extreme ends.
Jonestown. How did fallacies play a role there?
Well, the cult leader, Jim Jones, leveraged phrases like, "No true follower would question Jim Jones." This equates group membership with correctness and loyalty. It dismisses any dissenting opinion by arbitrarily redefining who belongs to the true group. If you question, you're out, you're not true. The identity fallacy works similarly. The truth of an argument is evaluated not on its logic, but solely based on the speaker's identity or group affiliation. Daves argues this ultimately led to total ideological and psychological control, culminating in mass death, a terrifying illustration of the danger.
Unbelievable.
Relatedly, in-group bias and out-group homogeneity are common, favoring arguments from your own group, people like us know better, or generalizing negative stereotypes about opposing groups. All liberals are socialists, all conservatives hate science. These deeply reinforce tribal divisions and shut down genuine dialogue.
We see that online
Constantly. Individuals also engage in cognitive self-deception through fallacies. Confirmation bias reinforcement is rampant, especially on social media. Selective exposure creates those echo chambers, making it harder to encounter contradictory evidence, solidifying beliefs regardless of their truth, and overgeneralization, drawing sweeping conclusions from limited personal experiences. That one bad encounter means all people from that group are bad, cementing false beliefs based on anecdote, not evidence.
Right.
Lastly, Daves keenly observes how online mobs and certain aspects of cancel culture dynamics utilize these fallacies for social pressure and ideological enforcement. These environments often foster groupthink. Members suppress individual doubts for the sake of group harmony, valuing conformity over critical assessment. There's often a strong appeal to loyalty. If you truly care about this cause, you'd agree with us, overriding critical thought in favor of group allegiance. And tone policing is frequently employed, criticizing the emotional tone or delivery of an argument to invalidate its content, rather than actually addressing the substance. Daves argues this leads to conformity through social pressure and rhetorical intimidation, often silencing valid dissent.
It's really everywhere, isn't it? From statecraft down to online arguments. So what are the broader consequences? This constant barrage of distorted logic that Daves warns us about, what's the deeper impact?
One of the most insidious and maybe debilitating effects Daves identifies, particularly as a defining characteristic of our current information landscape, is something he calls epistemological fatigue.
Epistemological fatigue. What's that?
It's a state of profound mental exhaustion, debilitating confusion, caused by constant, overwhelming exposure to contradictory, misleading, or outright fallacious narratives. When you are continuously bombarded by information that seems logical on the surface but is fundamentally flawed or designed to mislead, or maybe just completely incoherent, your innate capacity to discern truth and make sound judgments, it just wears down.
So it's like being so utterly overwhelmed by conflicting signals, by the sheer volume of noise, that you just give up. Give up trying to figure out what's true. You just mentally check out.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. Daves explains how the simultaneous deployment of contradictory fallacies is a key driver of this deep fatigue. He gives some striking, almost dizzying examples.
Like what?
Like hearing things such as, "Truth is subjective unless our experts say otherwise."
Wait, how can it be both?
Exactly. Daves highlights how this attempts to combine a relativist fallacy claiming truth is just personal with an immediate appeal to absolute authority, asserting a specific group holds objective, unchallengeable truth. It's a single, self-contradictory, deeply confusing statement. Another example he gives: "Disinformation is whatever we say it is, and your disagreement with our definition proves you're spreading it."
Wow. That's a trap.
It's a perfect trap. It's a powerful combination of circular reasoning. The definition is self-referential and arbitrary intertwined with Yermi Caxative. Moving the goalposts, your very act of disagreeing is reinterpreted as proof of your guilt. Daves argues that these kinds of contradictory, logically impossible messages create deep cognitive dissonance. Your brain, wired for coherence, tries desperately to reconcile them, but it can't. They're fundamentally illogical, often designed to create chaos.
And the result is just mental exhaustion.
Exactly. The resulting mental overload isn't just frustrating, it's debilitating. It erodes trust not just in specific sources, but in the very possibility of objective truth. It's like a strategic disorientation campaign waged directly on the mind.
And the tragic, deeply concerning result, as Daves describes it, is this profound loss of trust in the very concept of truth itself, which ultimately leads to a passive acceptance of dominant narratives. It sounds like compliance through sheer confusion, a kind of mental surrender.
Exactly. When the public no longer possesses the mental energy or maybe the tools to discern what to believe or who to trust, the path of least resistance becomes passive acceptance. This, Daves warns, is the strategic compliance manipulators seek. A population too mentally fatigued, too disoriented, too disillusioned to question or resist dominant narratives. He argues this represents a profound undermining of societal judgment, a fragmentation of shared reality, and a dangerous susceptibility to control. It's a chilling vision of a society losing its collective ability to think critically.
Given this rather bleak, unsettling picture of our information environment, Daves doesn't just leave us there, does he? He argues that understanding and actively countering these fallacies is a moral and civic imperative.
He does. It's crucial.
So this isn't just about winning debates then, is it? Or sounding smart. It's about something far more fundamental.
No, it goes far, far beyond the mere intellectual skirmishes of debate. Daves insists that countering this pervasive, weaponized use of fallacies requires much more than just, a formal education in logic or memorizing a list of errors. It demands a holistic, robust approach to what he calls cognitive defense. He calls for a fundamental shift in our individual and collective approach to information, emphasizing 3 critical pillars.
Okay, what are they?
First, cognitive resilience. This is the profound ability to withstand mental manipulation, to resist that impulsive urge to accept narratives that bypass reason, to maintain mental fortitude when faced with confusing, overwhelming, or emotionally charged information.
Building mental strength against manipulation.
Exactly. Daves stresses it's about developing an inner strength, an active skepticism, an emotional discipline that allows you to resist being swayed by persuasive but ultimately false arguments. It involves cultivating habits like maybe an intentional information diet, consciously seeking diverse sources, allowing yourself the mental space to process information slowly rather than reacting instantly.
Okay, resilience. What's second?
Second, linguistic discernment. This is the finely tuned skill to see through rhetorical tricks, vague language, ambiguous phrasing, the intentional misuse of words.
Reading between the lines, almost.
And more than that, it's the ability to deconstruct arguments, to understand not just what is being said, but meticulously how it's being said, and whether the language itself is being used as a tool of deception. Daves encourages us to pay close attention to definitions, to subtle shifts in meaning mid-argument, to instances of strategic vagueness that obscure truth. He implies this means becoming almost like a forensic linguist in your daily life, constantly questioning the precision and intent behind the words you consume.
Linguistic discernment. Got it. And the third pillar.
And perhaps most profoundly, Daves highlights moral clarity. This is the courage, the ethical grounding, the unwavering commitment required to confront distortion and falsehood. Even maybe especially when speaking truth becomes dangerous or inconvenient or unpopular.
Standing up for truth even when it's hard.
Exactly. In an age where truth is often diluted, attacked, or made to seem subjective, Daves argues that upholding it requires a robust moral compass. The unwavering willingness to stand against manipulation, even when it means facing social pressure or professional repercussions or personal cost. It's the conviction to prioritize truth over comfort or popularity or ideological allegiance.
So if I'm understanding Dave's overarching message here, he calls his entire body of work a manual for cognitive defense.
That's the term he uses, yes.
It's about actively reclaiming clarity over confusion, asserting our freedom over manipulation, upholding integrity over the glittering, seductive illusions of deceit. He's essentially giving us a vital toolkit, not just for academics, but for every single one of us, to fight back for our own minds in this new battle space.
Precisely. That's it exactly. And what's truly fascinating here, what really drives the urgency of Dave's work, is his implication that in an age where the very architecture of thought itself is under siege, where the fundamental processes by which we reason and form beliefs are being systematically targeted and manipulated, he says the restoration of discernment is the beginning of both resistance and renewal.
Wow. Resistance and renewal.
Yeah. The battle for truth, he argues, is not merely an intellectual pursuit. It is, at its deepest level, profoundly moral and absolutely essential for preserving human autonomy. It's about protecting the very essence of our ability to think, judge, and act freely.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now, navigating that constant barrage of information in our modern world? Othniel Max Dave's work truly shines a powerful light, doesn't it, on the hidden machinery of persuasion that operates relentlessly in politics and corporations, even in our personal lives. It really forces each of us to ask a fundamental and, I think, urgent question. Am I truly thinking, or am I being thought for? Am I actively discerning, critically evaluating, or am I passively accepting the narratives presented to me?
And this raises that important question for all of us to consider as we move forward. In a world increasingly governed by narratives that often overshadow reality, where truth can feel so fragmented, so elusive, how actively are you practicing your own cognitive defense? Are you ready, truly ready, to discern, to question, and crucially, to resist the subtle yet incredibly potent seduction of logical manipulation in all its pervasive forms? Because, as Dave makes crystal clear, that ability isn't just a useful skill in a complex world, it is a moral imperative for preserving our freedom and our very capacity for independent thought.
We certainly hope this deep dive into the work of Othniel Max Daves has given you some powerful new tools, maybe a renewed perspective, to begin that vital journey of discernment. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. Dive deep, think critically, and we'll see you next time.